You know what's weird? A lot of the worst decisions people make do not happen because they're stupid, reckless, or lazy. They happen because the person is standing in front of life like it only has two buttons: yes, no, stay, leave, buy, don't buy, text them, do not text them, quit the job, keep the job. In other words, this kind of like a black and white thinking. And once your brain turns a situation into that kind of a cheap little coin flip, your decision quality drops fast. And that's really the trap here, the narrow frame. Not bad intention, not low IQ, just a frame that's too small for the size of the real problem. You can see it everywhere. Somebody says, should I move to another city or not? Sounds like a serious adult decision. Mature, important, big life moment. But look closer, and it's already broken because who said those were the only two options? Move forever or stay forever? Really? What about testing the city for a month? What about applying remotely first? In other words, this kind of giving yourself like a test period, you know? What about moving to a nearby city instead? What about changing neighborhood instead of changing your whole life? In other words, instead of having like a yes or no thinking, you expanding your options and like watching to the map, you zoom out and you see more options so you can make better decision. What about staying but rebuilding your routine so thoroughly that it feels like a new city anyway? And a lot of people don't have a life problem, they have an option problem. And in other words, the problem is not like your problem, but the way how you frame options. It's about limited options. And this is where the whole thing gets sneaky. Narrow decisions feel intelligent because they feel focused. You feel like you're getting to the point. But focus is not always wisdom. Sometimes focus is just tunnel vision, wearing glasses. I think that's why people get stuck for weeks on things that should have taken 2 days. They keep staring harder at the same two miserable options, hoping one of them will suddenly start glowing like it got blessed by heaven. It never does, because the problem usually is not that option A and option B are both equally good. The problem is that both of them are incomplete. For example, you can create option C, which combined option A and option B, so you don't have to choose between one of them. Think about dating, not the dramatic movie version, real life. Somebody says, should I break up or not? That question alone already tells you their brain is in a cage. Because maybe the real options are have one brutally honest conversation, change the pace of the relationship, stop imagining the person will magically become different, take like a 2 weeks of distance, meet each other in a different environment, or finally admit that the relationship is being forced to answer questions that actually belong to the person's own loneliness, insecurity, or boredom. But no, instead, the brain goes full courtroom drama, guilty or not guilty. And like one of the reasons, because for the brain it's much easier to think in terms of like a few options. Brain wanna spend as less calorie as it can and energy And you gotta force yourself to say like, hey motherfucker, let's think about other options. Stay together or burn it down. Humans love turning complicated emotional systems into elevator buttons. Same with money. Somebody stands in a store holding a jacket and thinks, should I buy it or not? But that is not the real question. The real question is, what else does this money want to become? That is the question almost nobody asks. Because the moment you ask it, the jacket is no longer competing with the so-called nothing. Now it's competing with like a 3 dinners with friends, part of like a plane ticket, 6 books, or like a course, groceries. In other words, you just have to realize in terms of this example that money can bring you not just this fucking jacket or wherever. With money you can buy another things, and based on these more options, you can choose what is your priority. Or maybe a nice future version of you, or just like the luxury of not checking your bank app with like one eye closed in fear. What is your priority right now? And that's opportunity cost, but in a normal human language, it just means this. Every yes is made of invisible no's. Every choice kills other choices. And people make worse decisions when they pretend that is not happening. That is part of why salespeople, algorithms, and impulses love a narrow frame. They want you looking at like a one bright object in a spotlight, just this phone, just this car, just this pair of shoes, just this limited time. Thing that apparently will evaporate from the earth in 14 minutes unless you act now like a raccoon in a panic. They don't want you to like a calmly stepping back and asking, compared to what? Like, for example, this good or bad compared to what? And that question is dangerous to bad decisions. Compared to what? Has saved people from a terrible apartments, terrible subscriptions, terrible business partnerships, terrible haircuts, and at least half of online shopping. And by the way, this problem doesn't disappear when people become so-called professionals. If anything, grown adults in polished offices sometimes make even dumber, narrow decisions than teenagers, because now the bad decision gets served with like a sliced jargon and coffee. A company says, should we launch this product or not? Wrong frame. Maybe the real question is whether the product should be smaller, slower, targeted differently, tested with a niche audience, delayed on a purpose, or killed and replaced by a simpler version. But once the room gets emotionally attached to the like a headline option, everybody starts becoming its lawyer. Nobody asks what else is possible. They don't explore. They defend. And that's how expensive mistakes are born. In other words, you gotta be open-minded for the wider options, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of alternatives. You probably felt this in your own life, in a quieter ways, like when you're exhausted and say, should I go to the gym or like skip it? Maybe neither. Maybe the answer is 20 minutes walk, stretching, a lighter workout, or like going tomorrow morning instead of tonight. But because the brain framed it as heroic discipline versus total failure, you end up doing nothing and feeling guilty, which is a very popular modern hobby. Or take a friendships. People ask, should I confront them or let it go? And that sounds reasonable until you notice there are about 12 missing options in the middle. You could ask a clarifying question. You could change the amount of access they have to you. You could test the friendship in smaller doses. You could stop expecting depth from someone who only has surface level capacity. You could forgive them without pretending the pattern is fine. You could be warmer but less available. Yeah, that's a good point. You could be warmer but less available, because again, people used to think in a way like I gotta open my heart like 24/7 or fucking close forever. Life has way more dimmer switches and on-off buttons, but for some reason humans keep shopping in the button aisle. And I think one of the reasons this happens is because certainty feels good. The brain likes a duel. Two options, one winner, clean finish. Feels cinematic, feels sharp, feels like control. But real wisdom is often annoyingly uncinematic. It sounds more like, well, there may be a third route here that's less exciting, but much smarter. In other words, it's not about entertaining yourself, and maybe option sounds boring, but logically it makes sense. Nobody makes a movie trailer out of that sentence, but that sentence has probably saved more lives than most dramatic confidence ever has. And there's another trick here that I love because it's almost rude in how effective it is. Imagine the option you obsessing over disappears. Gone, not allowed, you can't pick it, now what? And that question is unbelievably good because it forces your brain to stop licking the same thought over and over, like a dog with a toy. Let's say someone is obsessed with one dream apartment, too expensive, bad location, tiny kitchen, but emotionally they already started imagining their coffee mug on the shelf. Dangerous moment. Now ask, okay, you can't rent that place, it's gone. What do you do? Suddenly, the mind wakes up. In other words, that's the practical tip in terms of forcing yourself to think in wider options. When you, instead of constantly thinking in a way like I gotta do ABC, you force yourself to say, like, for example, what if I forbidden or some fucked up thing happened and I cannot do like these options? You force yourself to think about other alternatives. And it's not just for like options for the sake of options, but you force yourself to do that because you want to make better decision in order to reach your goal. Because what's the point to do the same shit if that things not helping you to reach the goal? And if we continue with this apartment example, suddenly the mind wakes up. Well, maybe I look in another neighborhood. Maybe I get a roommate for 6 months and save more. Maybe I stay where I am and improve the space. Maybe I stop confusing new apartment with the new life. Look at that. Intelligence has entered the room. And that vanishing options tricks works with all kind of things. Somebody says, should I take this job? Tell them, pretend the offer disappeared this morning. What would you build now? And if they instantly come alive with fresh ideas, that tells you something. It tells you the job was not the answer. It was just loudest object in the room. And another thing that I want to mention finally, when you really can't see clearly, borrow someone else's eyes from the outside narrow frames are often obvious. You can hear it in people's language immediately. For example, I either do this or that, or I have to do blah blah blah. My only choices are. Those phrases should make you suspicious. Most all the time, they're not describing reality. They're describing a stressed nervous system. In other words, they're more emotional rather than logical. And honestly, this like a whole topic is bigger than decision making. It's about freedom. A narrow frame is a freedom problem, not because somebody locked you up, but because your mind quietly reduced the size of the map, and it drew it tiny like a circle around like two measurable possibilities, and like it called that so-called the world. And health work like of becoming wiser, like it is learning to redraw the map while like you're still emotional, still rushed, still tempted, still scared. And that's hard, but it's powerful, because the truth is a lot of people are not trapped by life. They're trapped by the first version of the question. And that is fantastic news, because questions can be rewritten. Sometimes the like smartest thing you can say is not like here's my answer. Sometimes it's wait, and that's the wrong question. And weirdly enough, that's often the moment your life starts getting bigger. Thank you for listening. Subscribe this channel, like smash the like button. See you next time.